that's in tune. Hi, my name's Daniel Mclaughlin, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I thought we'd continue on the topic that I brought up last week regarding some of the tones that I got on my latest collection of songs. Last week I covered the electric guitar sounds. You can check that out on my channel. You can also check out the whole collection of songs on my channel as well. But today I thought we'd talk about some of the acoustic guitar sounds that I got on the album. I thought we'd talk about the guitar sound, the acoustic guitar sound, and what goes into crafting a good acoustic guitar sound, how I recorded it, and then also the processing. All right, so let's get into what makes a good acoustic guitar sound, first of all, before we even start to record. Obviously, a great acoustic guitar is important. This is a Collings OM1. I got it about 2 or 3 years ago from Chicago Music Exchange in Chicago. I picked it out against 3 or 4 or 5 different acoustic guitars, actually all Collings. I had my heart set on a Collings OM2H at the time. After playing 3 or 4 of them, I settled on this one, not even really liking the sunburst color of this guitar, but it has been the best acoustic guitar that I've owned ever. I'm still very excited about playing it every single day. This is an OM size guitar, meaning it's a little smaller than a Dreadnought or a Grand Performance model. And in fact, when I play this guitar, I really think that it sounds a little bit more dense, a little bit more articulate. It's not overly sparkly like a Taylor would be. It's not super present in the bass like any kind of Dreadnought would be, or some Gibsons. It's just got a really balanced tone to me. But when I play this, every string rings out very pure and very balanced to me, and that's why I personally like it, and why I chose it over a lot of the other guitars that were inside of Chicago Music Exchange that day. This is also a mahogany back and side guitar. A lot of the OM2Hs that I was looking at are rosewood back and side, and they had a very present bass. Julian Lage actually uses Collings OM1s. That's actually his signature model. He once described it as something that sounds great but rewards very good playing. It reacts really well to a good touch. It's dynamic, but if you dig in too hard, the guitar will kind of blow out when it is played a little too hard, which is not the greatest sound of all time. I'll demonstrate it right now. There's a little bit of like natural compression of the sound. It's not a loud guitar by any means, but it's all the reason more to play it with a really good touch. This guitar I've actually been using nickel strings on for the last couple years as well. I was always kind of a phosphor bronze or 80-20 Martin bronze, and then a string broke and Martin sent me some retros to try out, the Martin Retro series. They're subdued, they're not too bright, but they're still present. They actually age pretty well too. I can get a couple months out of these. During the recording process as well, I grabbed this pick to try and play these songs. This is a Dunlop Tortex 0.88mm, and the tone was just a little too thin. You know, I wasn't super happy about that. This is a solo guitar record. And then I grabbed a pick that I've been really liking lately called the Fender True Shell series. This one's actually a little bent. This is one of those organic material kind of things where if you drop it into water, I think it'll just dissolve. These have been my favorite on acoustic guitar. The sound is there. The Fender True Shell is kind of my favorite pick right now, but I've got some experience with some Red Bear picks, some Blue Chip picks. Wiegans are phenomenal as well. It may sound a little ridiculous to be spending something like $12 or $25, or even in the case of the Blue Chip, $50. It certainly changes the sound of the guitar enough to warrant maybe a consideration. Cool, so the room and the recording process, pretty straightforward as well. Obviously, with an acoustic instrument, you're going to want to have a microphone, a good microphone. In this case, I was using a Neumann KM184. Actually, I was using two Neumann KM184s in an XY recording setup. Now, the choice between stereo and mono microphones when you're recording is an important one, because recording in stereo is not always the best option, and it's not always something that you should pursue if you can do it. If you've got the inputs, if you've got the microphones, I wouldn't always record in stereo. For something like a solo guitar thing, stereo is probably the best option because you're hearing it alone. And if you can hear an acoustic guitar well enough to be able to record in stereo, you may want to consider recording in stereo. But if it's in a big mix, a mono mic is probably the better option. It's easier to control. It's easier to, you don't need to deal with phase. The Neumann KM184s were also stereo matched. I bought them together as a set. The stereo match thing is not as important as many people think. Back in the day when there was a lot of inconsistency between microphones, stereo matched meant that you were getting a very similar microphone because the serial numbers were right after each other. They were consecutive. That means as Neumann was bringing out microphones, you'd get this one and that one. So hopefully as consistent as you could get it. But now these microphones are all manufactured to such a consistent standard and tested to such a consistent standard that really the matched pair thing only holds water in its resale value. All right, so you can buy a matched pair. It's going to be a little bit more expensive. It'll come in one box, which is kind of cool. But don't stop yourself from buying a microphone that's not stereo matched. It doesn't matter that much. Obviously, if you're buying vintage microphones like the microphone that this is based off of, the KM84, you may want to buy a stereo matched set. But with these modern recreations, I wouldn't worry too much about it. All right, and so I actually used an XY pattern to record my acoustic guitar, pointed directly at the 12th fret. That's a very simple way of recording acoustic guitar. There's a lot of different ways to record. You could obviously do a spaced pair. You could do one over the shoulder, one kind of at a distance in front of you. Sky's the limit in terms of what you want to try. Just make sure that they're in phase. Always keep in mind, too, that when you listen to an acoustic guitar, you're not that far away from it. If you're playing acoustic guitar, you're listening to it maybe a foot away. If you can see, my face is about a foot from my guitar. If you're listening to an unamplified acoustic guitar, you're maybe 5 feet from it max, and you may not be hearing it as good as some other people can. You do not necessarily want to rely on like a distanced microphone to record an acoustic guitar very well. Close mics are your friend. Room mics may add in that extra sauce, that extra niceness. And obviously proximity is a consideration too. How close do you get to the guitar? The closer you get, the more bass you're going to get. The further away, the thinner it's going to sound. Also, over the spectrum of the acoustic guitar, if you're right on top of the sound hole, you're going to get overloaded with bass. Down here, you're going to get too much bass. Up here, you're going to get too much treble. So that's why they generally see the 12th fret as the sweet spot of the acoustic guitar. But always record and listen back and make sure that you're kind of trying out different things. Each acoustic guitar is different. Each room is different. See what works best. The room that you record the acoustic guitar in is very important too. And actually, as recording techniques get more complex, as you add more microphones, the room becomes just that much more important. Reflection is your friend. Have you ever listened to an acoustic guitar at the beach? It sounds horrible. Even the nicest acoustic guitar, played by the best guitar player, is going to not sound good. It's going to sound like an acoustic guitar at the beach, but it's got nothing to reflect off of it. It's got loose sand. It's got open air. It's not going to reflect back and develop into a really good acoustic guitar sound. Having a lively room, maybe with some acoustic control, like some panels or a sound blanket or even a rug on the floor, is probably your best bet in regards to getting a good acoustic sound. Again, close miking is your friend if you do not have the best room available. The closer you get to the acoustic guitar, the less the room matters. This room thing is actually part of the reason why a DI acoustic a lot of the times does not sound good in a recorded context. I actually have an LR Baggs Lyric in this acoustic guitar, and in a pinch, I might throw the Lyric output into a plugin like the Universal Audio Ocean Way Studios, just to give it that room sound, to emulate that developed sound. All right, let's see what's going on in the post-processing for these two tracks and you can see the context of a lot of these things that I'm describing. Alright, cool, so let's hop into Logic Pro again, and we'll take a look at some of the post-processing. This looks familiar. If you didn't see last week's video, we went over You Got a Friend in Me, we went over Surfer Girl, and we went over the theme of the song, and we went over all of the post-processing that I put into these. We also went over the mastering chain, which I'm not going to get into too much. We went over reverbs that I used, obviously the capital chambers I love. I used the preset here in Al Schmidt, the One, just a phenomenal sounding reverb here. Obviously these reverb chambers, Les Paul designed, Capitol Records, great. This is, funny enough, like the most processor hungry plugin that Universal Audio offers, and it's a bummer that it's one of the best sounding reverbs I've ever heard. But that actually works really well here on the bus, alright? So you can just kind of feed it however much. As you can see, I kind of have defined amounts that I chose. It's also one of those kind of dense in the background reverbs that just sounds good when it's used very conservatively. I'm trying to avoid the word subtly now because I use that a lot. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these changes that you make are very subtle, and it's the sum of all the parts that make up a good sound. So into the processing of a lot of these. So let's check out Golden Slumbers, right? And so just a very simple, very short song. Alright, so the most important thing here I saw was we've got some fairly dramatic dynamic changes. I didn't want those to sound more compressed than the soft parts. And even with the acoustic guitar that I mentioned, the Collings, that has kind of that natural compression to it, not a wide variance in volume, it still does require a little bit of compression. So I have this Teletronics LA2A, which is just such a simple compressor to put on. I like it because a lot of the times you can kind of thin out an acoustic guitar if you add compression in a bad way. This is just such a simple leveler. All it does is just level out the signal a little bit, which is the ideal. You know, you don't want to have too much variance, but you want to still retain some of that dynamic quality. Especially, again, these were being mixed with a consideration of them being released on Instagram, on YouTube. Coming out of iPhone speakers, we don't want to have too much of a variance in dynamic level. Pro Q3. This is the Fab Filter plugin. Again, I just wanted to cut a little bit of the boomy bottom end. The room that I'm in has a little bit of low frequency rumble. And then the Studer. Alright, get a little bit of that tape saturation in there. Make it a little bit older sounding. You can even hear it in there. Cool, so that's Golden Slumbers. Here's Must Be in a Good Place Now. Now these are unprocessed, keep that in mind. So you can kind of hear even a little bit of that acoustic guitar shake of it being on my lap. If you're listening on headphones, you can probably hear that. You know, there's an element of stuff that you just can't control, especially in situations like this. This was actually the first take that I did, that I recorded this. And that's not supposed to be like a flex. That's just like the first one a lot of the time sounds the best. It's new, it's exciting. You're not sitting around allowing yourself to get nervous. So stuff like allowing the sound of your chair making sound, the sound of the acoustic guitar rubbing up against your leg, it's fine. And especially in a context of a mix with other instruments, you're not going to hear that too much. It's kind of a little bit like that scrape that you just heard over the wound strings. That's just something that we as guitar players ignore. So obviously a very similar processing, right? We've got this, Teletronics, and then instead of the Studer, we use Saturn. Again, it's just livening up a little bit of the bass, a little bit of the high end. Obviously this is a great EQ as well. You can add in some bands, you can raise the mids a little bit, you can calm down the highs if it's something like sharp or like a Telecaster or something that's cool. And so all that together, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, and comment down below if you've got any questions, and I'll see you in the next one.